Root beer is a sweetened carbonated beverage which, despite its name, has little to nothing to do with actual beer. Nonetheless, people throughout the world enjoy it so enthusiastically, you could be forgiven for thinking it contains alcohol. And while there are dozens of different brands of the old sarsaparilla, a handful of iconic sodas have been sitting at the top of the heap for the past century. But which one is the best? Well, today, we're going to take a look at which root beer is the definitive root beer. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other carbonated beverages you would like to hear about. Okay, time to get to the root of root beer. As we mentioned, root beer has nothing to do with beer. In fact, it contains no alcohol at all. It does, on the other hand, sometimes contain roots. The beverage, which was invented in North America, gets its distinctive taste from flavorings that usually include things like sassafras root, wintergreen, sarsaparilla, birch, and juniper. Nobody is sure exactly who invented root beer, but many suspect it was derived from medicinal root teas made by Native Americans. Those teas contained many of the same leaves, roots, barks, fruits, and flowers that came to define the taste of root beer. And the earliest root beers were also sold as medicinal. When exactly root beer first became carbonated is another one we don't know the answer to. But advertisements of the era suggest it was somewhere around 1850. In any case, the first person to successfully market the drink was a pharmacist named Charles Elmer Hyers, who worked out of Philadelphia in the late 1800s. He's the guy who came up with the name root beer, and his products laid the groundwork for the root beer business we know today, which is mostly dominated by big corporate brands like A&W, Barq's, Mug, and IBC. But which brew is the best? Which one is the Coca-Cola of root beer? To answer that question, we need to start with a little history. The Belfast Beverage Company of San Francisco, California, was founded in 1877 and quickly found great success with its ginger ale and sparkling water products. Likely emboldened by that success, in 1885, they introduced their newest beverage, Dr. Sweats. Despite being the worst conceivable name for a beverage, Dr. Sweats hung around for quite a while. In 1947, however, the product was rechristened with a decidedly more straightforward moniker, Belfast Root Beer, but that might have been too straightforward, because in 1955, they added some bells and whistles to the name, which became Belfast Old-Fashioned Mug Root Beer. At some point, that was shortened to Mug Old-Fashioned Root Beer, and finally, just plain old Mug Root Beer. Powered by a series of print and radio advertisements which touted the slogan, "You haven't tasted root beer like this in years," Mug became famous for its true draft taste. And in the 1960s, they released a sugar-free formula, which made them an early adapter in the area of diet soda, along with brands like Diet Right and Tab. Today, Mug is owned by the Pepsi-Cola Company, who purchased the trademark in 1986. And it was Pepsi that was responsible for giving Mug its now ubiquitous bulldog mascot, which was part of an effort to give the brand some personality. They still make both regular and diet variations of Mug, as well as regular and diet Mug cream sodas, although the latter can be a little harder to find depending on where you live. Barq's root beer was first bottled around 1900. The formula was created by Edward Barq, one of the owners of the Barq's Brothers Bottling Company, which he co-founded in the French Quarter of New Orleans in 1890. The other owner was his brother Gaston, who presumably quit the soda game shortly thereafter to eat eggs and hunt beasts. Back in those days, Charles Hyers was attempting to place a trademark on the term root beer, so to avoid legal problems, Barq's didn't actually market their root beer as root beer. They just called it Barq's and marketed it with the simple, yet apparently effective slogan, "Drink Barq's. It's good." Hey, we did a whole episode about this. The company was also wary of the term root beer because they knew their product was a little different than other so-called root beers. Barq's unusual formula was mostly sarsaparilla-based. It was also more carbonated than most of its competitors, while simultaneously having less sugar and foam than most other brands. Nonetheless, when the legal threat passed, they settled into calling the product Barq's Famous Old Time Root Beer, a name they would stick with until 2012, when they just became plain old Barq's Root Beer. Unlike brands like A&W, most Barq's does contain caffeine, roughly 22.5 milligrams per 12-ounce serving to be exact. We say most because if you're lucky enough to live in the state of Utah, you can find a special caffeine-free version made specifically for Mormons, whose religious beliefs forbid them from having any caffeine. Or if you're not in Utah, you could just drink Diet Barq's, which is also caffeine-free. Over the years, the company, which is now owned by Coca-Cola, has experimented a bit with other variations. For example, they've tried their hand at both yellow and red cream sodas, a French vanilla soda, and a weird concoction called Barq's Floats, which was formulated to taste like a root beer float. That actually sounds pretty awesome, but it wasn't a particularly big hit and was discontinued in the mid-aughts. The A in A&W was hotelier and entrepreneur Roy W. Allen. In 1919, he purchased a recipe for root beer from a pharmacist and then started a root beer stand in Lodi, California. That stand quickly became a chain of stands, so to help him run his new soft drink empire, Allen partnered up with his employee Frank Wright, who became the W in A&W. Eventually, Allen bought Wright out, trademarked the A&W name, and started franchising A&W restaurants, making them the first restaurant franchise ever. By the 1960s, there were over 2,000 locations in the U.S. alone, and today there are still 1,000 worldwide. Initially, if you wanted an A&W beer, you had to go to an A&W restaurant or root beer stand. But in 1971, A&W finally made their flagship product commercially available in bottles and cans, so everyone could enjoy one in the comfort of their own home and/or gas station. In 1974, they introduced A&W Sugar Free, which they apparently had trouble settling on a name for because it became Diet A&W in 1987 and A&W Zero Sugar in 2020. And in 2011, they released A&W 10, which was a low-calorie root beer. That one was discontinued in 2018. Today, the A&W brand is owned by Keurig Dr. Pepper. Known for its sweet, foamy, caffeine-free formula and a distinct creamy taste that comes from a unique combination of sarsaparilla root, birch bark, licorice root, and anise, it has remained one of the most popular root beers in the world for decades. But the recipe isn't exactly the same all over the world. For example, in 2017, A&W Canada reformulated their product to replace high fructose corn syrup with cane sugar. IBC stands for Independent Breweries Company, which was the name of the St. Louis-based syndicate of brewers that originally manufactured IBC root beer. It does not stand for Irritable Bowel Cola. IBC was formed by the Grisadec family of St. Louis, Missouri in 1919. Thanks to Prohibition, the manufacture and sale of alcohol was to be prohibited starting in 1920, and the Grisadecs thought they could protect their position in the beverage industry by assuming control of the trade in root beer, which was still legal. And to their credit, sales of root beer, particularly IBC, soared. In the long run, however, their syndicate wasn't terribly efficient or profitable, and IBC closed up shop during the Great Depression. The trademark changed hands a number of times over the subsequent decade, and since 2008, it's been owned by the good people at Keurig Dr. Pepper, the same folks who make A&W. Over the years, the brand has experimented with releases of tangerine cream soda, cherry cola, strawberries and cream soda, peach cream soda, and birch beer, among others. Those are all discontinued now, but the company still makes root beer, diet root beer, and a handful of other flavors. And like Canadian A&W, IBC stopped using high fructose corn syrup in 2016. Since then, all of their beverages are made with cane sugar. So, what's the definitive root beer? Which beverage is the McDonald's, no, the Taylor Swift of root beer? The brand that immediately pops into your head when you think of ordering one. Obviously, sales is a big part determining that, and when it comes to sales, A&W, IBC, and Barq's have traditionally been the leaders of the pack. In fact, in recent decades, right around 80% of all root beer sales in the United States were accounted for with just those three brands. And of those three brands, A&W has long been the single biggest seller. Or at least it was until 2023, when its numbers were surpassed by the sales of the prebiotic root beer-inspired beverage made by Olipop. That may be because Olipop claims to be more than just another root beer, touting all kinds of health and digestive benefits the brand attributes to its use of botanicals, prebiotics, and plant fibers as ingredients. But being the best-selling brand doesn't necessarily make it the definitive brand. There's also taste to consider. And while that's an extremely subjective area, our admittedly unscientific survey of Taste Test found Olipop often falling in the middle of the pack. Sprecher Root Beer, made by the Sprecher Brewing Company of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was a name we found near the top of many lists, as was Barq's. But the root beer that appears at or near the top of the most taste lists is, drumroll please, A&W. That was a little anticlimactic. This isn't to say that everyone loves A&W. Some critics complain of its excessive sweetness and the inferiority of the bottled product compared to the root beer on tap at an A&W restaurant. But overall, a good solid plurality of taste testers seem to place A&W, the most recognized brand in the US, at the top of their list for its smooth flavor and its creamy texture. Of course, there are other great root beers, particularly if you're okay spending a little extra on some craft soda brands. We recommend trying Sioux City Root Beer, Virgil's Handcrafted Root Beer, Stewart's Root Beer, WBC Chicago-style Root Beer, Bundaberg Root Beer, and Dr. Brown's, among others. But if you're looking for the definitive root beer, the letters you need to remember are A and W. They're right there on the side of the can. So, what do you think? What's your favorite root beer? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other weird history food videos.